Welcome to Team Perry's Step Out of Line podcast, featuring co-hosts Perry and Lori Finkelstein. Together, they explore, meet, and share inspirational stories with guests who have made a positive impact in today's world. This podcast resonates with our hope to make this world a better place one step at a time through love, acceptance, and uplifting conversations.
Once I was in college and decided that I wanted to go into broadcast journalism, and by the way, I never wanted to be on TV. I actually wanted to be a behind the scenes writer. And I applied for an internship at NBC when in college, and they put me in the newsroom and I shadowed reporters, and that's when I fell in love with it. But people always say, you must have wanted to be on TV. I went into broadcast in college after that internship. I loved it. And then I went to graduate school, and I went to a special program where you could put resume reels together. And in the broadcast industry, a reel is a video montage of your work. So I put a reel together, and I went to this grad program in order to do that. And I asked my mentor at the grad program, would I be able to get my first reporting job in New York? Because I don't know if you're familiar with the industry, but New York's the number one market. You have to go to Alabama, Louisiana, like a really small market to get your start. And he said to me, I would be very surprised, but I've been surprised before. So I remember thinking, okay, well, let me surprise him. So I knew that there were only a handful of stations that would hire a rookie reporter. And I heard that News 12, specifically in the Bronx and Brooklyn, would hire young reporters who had potential, but they had to shoot, write, narrate, and edit and do everything themselves. Because I truly believe half of you getting a job is skill. The other half is them knowing who you are and liking you. So I'm like, so how do I get on their radar? So I went through my grad school alumni database and found every single person that worked at News 12 that I could find, from cameraman to reporter to whatever, and reached out and said, can you help me get an internship? Someone got back to me right away. His name was Charlie Malicki, and he was a cameraman, and he got me an internship at News 12 while I was in grad school. So I'm at News 12 Long Island. From there, I just start telling everyone what I want to do. And they're like, well, if you have any shot, it's at News 12 the Bronx. So after working my butt off that entire internship, the head of the intern program called News 12 the Bronx and said, we love this girl. Let her intern for you next semester. So that was my last semester of grad school. And while I was there, I just went up to the managing director of the newsroom and said, I really want to report for you one day. And he goes, well, do you have a reel? So I said, yeah, I do. I give him my reel, and he watches it in front of me, and he goes, I'd like for you to join our academy program. It's kind of like American Idol. They have you go through 3 weeks of reporting, and they train you a little bit, but you're kind of on your own, but they give you tips. And at the end of the 3 weeks, put together the stories that you've done, and you sit with all the managers, and they literally go around and say, yes, 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 or no, like if they're going to hire you or not. If they took you into the program, you had a very good shot of getting it. And that's how I got my first job in New York City, covering the Bronx. And then eventually I went full-time to News 12 Brooklyn. I remember one of my early stories, there was a 500-pound man who was found in a barrel, and his limbs were all cut up. And I go up by myself. I'm a 5'2" petite girl. That was one of my earliest stories that I covered. And it was very common to cover stories like that in some of these neighborhoods in the Bronx and Brooklyn. That being said, I covered some incredibly uplifting and hopeful stories. But that's my first example of stepping out of line, right? Everyone felt like you had to do this one path. You had to go to a tiny market. I'm like, well, why can't I beat the odds and do it differently? So I came up with my own solution. The second example is I was reporting for Fox 5 for the last 6 years of my broadcast career, and I had the best, incredible opportunity there. And I got to fill in at the anchor desk. I got to start a series on Holocaust survivors, which I pitched. I went up to my boss and said, I want to start this series. And I went to Poland and produced short films, and they let me go travel all around the New York tri-state area interviewing survivors, and it was incredible. And I got to the point where even though I loved Fox, I felt like I was ready for something different. And I asked myself, what do I want to do? Like, what am I passionate about? And all I wanted to do was tell Holocaust stories. Honestly, I was tired of politics. I was tired of fires and crime. I didn't want to do the whole general assignment reporting anymore. So I'm like, well, who would even hire a Holocaust reporter? So I typed up a pitch of what I could do, what I would bring to the organization, how this job would even be created and recognized. And I pitched it to several places, including the Holocaust Museum on Long Island, where I had just moved to. And long story short, they hired me as the museum's first ever storyteller. So the other way I stepped out of line is creating a job for myself. And I tell people this all the time: come up with your dream gig, even if it doesn't exist, and bother every single person who could potentially create it for you until they cave. Everyone will hire someone that they see has passion and could bring some type of benefit to that organization. I really believe that. It's not going to come easy. This was maybe a year or two in the making, but you can do it. I fully believe that.
It's funny because Perry is doing the same thing for herself, starting a foundation, coming up with the idea of what really hasn't been done. And the more people she speaks to, the more she realizes there are many different roads and paths she can take to get to where she wants. And it's not necessarily the one she thought was going to be.
I had a reporter call me and she's like, I kind of want to follow in your footsteps. And like, I just don't know what to do. I don't want to leave my whole skill set behind. So I was like, well, what are you passionate about? She's like, I love my Greek Orthodox heritage. So I'm like, so become the Greek Orthodox storyteller. Find a whole bunch of Greek Orthodox churches in your area, become their storyteller. Do stories on how Greek Easter is different from Christian Easter or Catholic Easter. Do a story on all the different events coming up. I mean, the sky is the limit. This storytelling role I really see could be created in any single industry.
So you're a storyteller, obviously. You might even be the voice of this generation, this dying generation of Holocaust survivors that you're trying to get their story out. The time just getting less and less possible for you to get these survivors because they're aging and they're dying. Do you feel more sense of an urgency today than you did, let's say, 2 years ago?
I was at the library yesterday and picked up a call. I know you're not supposed to take a call in the library, but I quickly was talking to my colleague and someone next to me just heard me say Holocaust. And he came up to me, just a random stranger at the library. And he goes, sorry, what'd you say about Holocaust? My wife is the granddaughter of a Holocaust survivor. And right away, I was like, what's her name? Give me her number. Let me interview her.
Right.
And the father was still alive. Absolutely. When I get in contact or meet someone who has connections to a survivor, that very day, I call that survivor, reach out to set up an interview.
Right.
I absolutely see the urgency. I have interviewed survivors who are so sharp, who, even though they might be in their 90s, to me seem invincible because of how they've survived time and time again. And they'll pass weeks after my interview with them. Yes, this is our last chance to interview them. And I'm not getting as much time to edit the documentaries, which really is what I'm so passionate about, is not just interviewing them, but getting the stories out there. But my number one priority right now is not editing, it's capturing them while I still can.
Right.
And a lot of the survivors ask me, when will I see my documentary? And I'm very honest. I say, I don't know, but I do promise that whether you're here or not, the story will live on for generations to come. So some of the interviews that I'm capturing now might not be an edited documentary for 5 years from now. But all I know is that I need to capture them, and that's what I'm doing.
Your grandfather, you want to tell us a little bit about his story?
My maternal grandfather, I call my Poppy my whole life, and he was an Auschwitz survivor, and he was one of 11 children. 2 children died before the war, and when the war broke out, he was one of 9 siblings. 5 of his siblings and both of his parents were murdered. And he survived a ghetto, multiple forced labor camps, including Auschwitz. And I am very aware of the fact that I would not be here today if not for him, if not for his will to persevere and survive. And that's why I feel like it's my obligation and my duty to keep his story alive. He passed in December, the very end of December of 2023, and I was with him in his final hours. And I looked in his eyes and I promised him that I would keep his story alive. And that's what I'm doing. And by keeping all Holocaust victim stories alive, it's the same obligation I have to all of them as I have to him. His prisoner number was 143499 in Auschwitz. And that was probably the first number I ever had memorized. Growing up, I always had the number on his arm. And from a young age, I always understood that I was the grandchild of a survivor.
So I know a few people who have done work, and I read about people who've done work archiving and going through everything and going to Auschwitz and going through still belongings and the museum. And it rips their heart apart. And as much as they try to isolate themselves and look at it like without any emotion, it wears over time. And I think they can only do it for a certain amount of time before they have to step away from it. Do you ever feel that it's just too much and too overwhelming, or your passion for telling everybody's story just overrides all that?
A lot of it is from my time as a reporter covering crime and terribly tragic stories. You learn to remove yourself from each story emotionally, because if you let all of it affect you like that, it'd be so draining and you wouldn't even be able to tell the story and do the work. Sometimes it hits me a lot later. What I try very hard to do when I'm doing these interviews is to think of it as the storyteller and to not let it affect me, even though that's so hard to do. But over time, I use it more educationally. I think, like, not, oh my God, this is the saddest thing I've ever heard, but wow, this is so unique and so different. And I am learning something new for the first time. And that's really the only way to do this job. Because if you let every single story impact you like that, you wouldn't be able to even, I think, go through life because of the enormity of the trauma that all these survivors endured. Just to carry that with you, it would be impossible. There have been a few stories where I would shed a tear. It's rare, but some of them are so beyond heartbreaking. And there's some survivors who are just naturally such beautiful storytellers in how they share their firsthand testimony that it kind of rips at your heart. One survivor started crying, telling me how her sister was beaten to death right in front of her in Auschwitz. I mean, that's something that you can't go to sleep that night without thinking about. But for the most part, I try really hard to remove myself from it emotionally so that I can actually do the important work that needs to be done. But it's hard. No human can really do that easily. But when you've done so many of them, I don't want to say you've become numb, but I'm very focused on what my purpose is.
When you were younger and you saw your grandfather, tattoo with the number, you always knew, like, at that point that you wanted to be a storyteller, or did you just grow into it?
No, I didn't know I wanted to be a storyteller. I did want to be a writer at one point, and I didn't know I wanted to be a Holocaust storyteller. I was always aware of the fact that my grandfather was a survivor. I never, ever thought I would incorporate it into a full-time job. It was when I was in grad school, I pitched my graduate thesis project. It was a video project to be on Holocaust survivors, because I just wanted to think of something I was passionate about. And I knew at that time my grandfather was going to all these groups with Holocaust survivors, and I thought it would be really special to go profile him. And that's really when the bug bit me, when I was just so fascinated and so fulfilled by doing this work. Then I got my first job at News 12, where I did a 2-part series on Holocaust survivors. And then I did like 25 plus stories on survivors at Fox. It was gradual and it built over time. And the more and more I learned about my ancestry and my past as I got older, the more and more it inspired me to go in this direction. So I definitely did not know from a young age that I wanted to do this. But now that I'm here, I can't see myself doing anything else.
October 7th. It's never again. This is never going to happen to the Jewish people again. And then here we are, October 7th. as horrible as that was, what's coming after it is still even more horrible. The anti-Semitism that's rising in this country and around the world. How are you dealing with that? Are you dealing with the same reporter instinct as you have with your storytelling?
I grew up with Holocaust, so it was something that was ingrained in me from a young age. And I don't want to say I'm not horrified by it, but you get used to what the testimonies are. I can not make sense of it, but I have spent so much time studying and reading it that over time you're like, okay, well, this happened because of the hatred of Jews that was slowly taking over Europe, and they used Jews as a scapegoat. And I could kind of use logic to explain how it happened. And even though it's unthinkable, October 7th, when you think there will never be another Holocaust again, that it's behind us, when that happened, I think I felt shattered, and I think the rest of the world did too. And I've actually incorporated a lot of October 7th questions into my Holocaust survivor interviews. I generally ask them, did you ever think this could happen again? Or what are similarities between October 7th and the Holocaust? And are you frightened by this? Are you hopeful for the future? And I get so many different responses. I get some people who say the similarities are striking. This is exactly how it started. And then I had another survivor saying, no, this isn't the same thing. You know, the Holocaust was the government, you know, the Nazi party voted into power and the government controlling and making these decisions. We don't have a government that is ever going to force people into concentration camps. And he's like, this is not the same thing. We do not live in the same type of country. And you have to remember that. The only good that came of such a massacre, and I hate to even say that, is that I have seen Jews more united in the past year than I've seen in my entire existence. I have friends who were Jewish by birth, but were kind of atheist or who were super reformed, who have said to me, I want to become more religious. I want to start lighting Shabbat candles. The amount of stories I've heard from people who have just changed from October 7th is also incredible. And we focus so much on the darkness of that day because how can we not? But I try really hard, just like with my Holocaust stories, to focus on the hope and the future and the brightness that can come out of such a tragedy. And if you don't do that, then we're all going to go into deep depression because we need something to look forward to, or the world is just way too dark. I have a friend who grew up ultra-Orthodox who isn't now. And for a while, she just kind of pushed away from it. And she's now back, but in a less religious, more spiritual way. And she always says to me, I wish I grew up the way that you grew up. She's like, you are the proudest Jew I know, but you don't keep kosher and you don't observe Shabbat. And she was like, I wish I knew that there was another way of being Jewish. And what I say to her is that there's no one way of being Jewish. It's how we feel inside. And for me, it's not about the religious aspect of it. It's about traditions and culture and ancestry and what the Jewish people had to endure. And they endured all that and survived all that so that we could be free and proud Jews today. So for me, that is what Judaism is about. But I love that everyone can interpret it in their own way to what fits, their soul. We're just a shared people, right? Who know that we can count on one another. I remember being in Hebrew school when I was younger, and a teacher had said to me, let's say you were lost and in the middle of nowhere, and there were 100 houses on the block, but one had a mezuzah. Which home would you go to? That just to me encompasses Judaism, is that we all know that we can always support and be there for one another. And I think it's so beautiful and so unique.
And you're raising your daughters where they have an awareness, obviously, of who they are and what their heritage is.
In fact, I don't know how it came up or how my daughter heard the term Holocaust. And she asked me recently, I explained to her that there was, a bad group of people who wanted to kill the Jews, and Jews over time were able to fight back and win that war, was the best way that I can explain it. But I do think it's important for her at a very young age to understand where she comes from.
So my brother-in-law, my sister's husband, his parents were both in the Holocaust. He remembers his mother. His mother just passed away. When he was growing up, every night she would have nightmares and she would throw the lamp over and she would start screaming and crying and her husband would calm her down. But she never spoke about it during the day. She never spoke about her experiences. Like your grandfather seems like he was pretty open with it. They never spoke of it. And she went on a trip.
Did anyone ever ask?
I don't think so. I think it was so traumatic, they didn't want to bring it out.
And that's what I see a lot. People always say that they didn't speak about it. I go, but did you ask? So my grandfather never talked about it unless you asked him. And then he would talk about it. And my mom would always yell at me and say, leave him alone. It's too traumatic. Stop. And I'd always say to her, like, it's too traumatic. But if he doesn't tell me, then I'm never going to be able to keep it alive. So he's going to have to, suffer a little bit right now to tell me. And you know what? He didn't. He didn't suffer from reliving it. I actually felt like it was therapeutic for him.
Right.
He was so proud that I was carrying the story with me. And so I think a lot of people misinterpret survivors. People often ask me or ask survivors, why do you think you survived? And I truly, truly believe on my 100 plus interviews that I've been on, there's 3 reasons why they survived. The number one thing is luck. You had to be in the right place at the right time. When you got to a camp, they had to see that you were fit for work and give you a tattoo and send you to labor instead of thinking that you weren't fit and sending you to the gas chamber. My grandfather, every day for selection, he was chosen to work. So luck, number 1 is luck. Number 2 is wit. 1, you're lucky to get to where you are, to be able to work and not be killed. But every day, my grandfather made a decision to keep his mouth shut and look straight ahead and do his work. He said those who chose to speak back or chose not to obey were killed. He was working in the coal mines in Auschwitz, and he felt like if the Nazis didn't kill him, the fumes from the work that he was doing would. And he felt that he was kind of in an unorganized way put into the coal mines. He didn't think anyone was tracking his exact role at that moment. So the next day, when everyone broke off, he just said, you know what? I'm just going to go in this direction. And he didn't go to the coal mines and continued to go to that job every day. So he made this decision. He was going to die from these toxic fumes and chemicals. And then number 3 is genetics, hands down. I interview survivors who survived typhus in camps with no medicine, no food, nothing to drink. My grandfather was on the death march right before liberation, marched out of Auschwitz, January of 1945. It was freezing cold winter. He had the thinnest uniform. He had clog wooden shoes with no socks. People were dying left and right from frostbite, from illness. Anyone who couldn't keep up were getting shot. And he somehow survived that. And then he lived to be nearly 102. So luck, wit, genetics, you needed all 3 of those things to survive. And it's incredible how he did and how so many others did. And mental, the will to survive. He saw people take their own lives on the electric fence because they were so miserable and they wanted to kill themselves their way and not have the Nazis kill them. And every day he decided, I'm going to work my hardest to live today.
Did he marry somebody who was also a survivor?
He didn't. He moved to many places. He was adopted by a Jewish family in England for a few years after the war. Then he went to a great aunt, I believe, who was living in Canada. And then he made his way to the US and he met my grandma on Orchard Beach in the Bronx, which was a Jewish hotspot back in the day. And she was in a beautiful bikini and he was in his Speedo bathing suit. And it was love at first sight. They actually got married 3 months after meeting.
Is there anything you discovered since he passed that you didn't know and you were shocked?
Not really, because I asked every possible question I could have asked. That being said, I was actually more upset that I didn't ask more. One thing I started doing with my survivors and with my grandfather before he died was, forget about the Holocaust. What was life like before the war? And 2 months before he died, I asked him, how'd you brush your teeth? because they lived in a really, really poor town. The family had very little money. They didn't have electricity in their home. So they didn't even have toothpaste back then. He answered something that I didn't even know. He said they took like baking powder and like water and mixed it together. And said, how'd you go to the bathroom in the middle of the night? They only had outhouses. They would go in a bucket next to their bed. I mean,
Right.
all little things. I love focusing now on life before the war, but it's just 100 years ago, and they lived so differently. So that actually helped me just when I visualize him, not just see him as the survivor, but as a human who had a normal life before this. And I love visualizing him at this long wooden table with his 9 siblings and parents while they ate dinner and had Shabbat meals. And so, no, since he's passed, I haven't learned more, but in the months and years leading up to his passing, I was learning more and more about like who he was before the war broke out. Wait, let me tell you a really funny story. Do you remember 90210, the
Yeah.
show? I spoke about this at his unveiling. So I loved them when I was little, and I had a huge poster on my walls of like all the 90210 characters. And I came home one day and my grandparents were there, and I go up to my bedroom and there's a hole in the poster. And I like come down screaming. I'm like, why is there a hole in my 90210 poster? And one of the actors was wearing a cross necklace. And my copy's like, I didn't survive the Holocaust for you to have a cross up on your wall. My sister didn't remember a hole. She remembered having like black Sharpie on one of her posters.
You're part of a program for high school students and leadership. Could you just tell us a little bit about that?
I am the director of a program called Witness in Action, which is funded by UJA in partnership with the Sid Jacobson JCC. It's part of an overall program called Witness Project. In a nutshell, it's this incredible organization where high school students from across Long Island meet with Holocaust survivors every other week the entire academic year. So different students break off into groups and they meet with the same survivor all year. They learn that survivor story inside and out. And at the end of the year, there's this huge final show where half the students created artwork depicting different scenes from the survivor's life. And the other half of the students participate in a documentary that airs about the entire year-long program and these survivor stories. And then Witness in Action, the program that I lead, is for the graduates of Witness Project, the students who participated the year before, but who want to continue their Holocaust survivor participation. So I organize field trips and speakers and interesting programs throughout the year for the students. And I always bring survivors with me. And the beautiful part about being the director is that I get to create the entire curriculum, which is a lot of work, but I get to do things that I'm very passionate about. So one of our first activities this year was a flying trapeze day. And it's funny, and UJA goes, well, how is that, relevant to Holocaust survivors? So this is how I made it relevant. I called it Leap of Faith, because you have to take the leap of faith off the top of the trapeze. And we had survivors come with us. One amazing survivor, Manny Corman, he didn't go up there, but he watched. And as the students got down from their turn on the trapeze, they would sit with him and they'd ask questions. And he'd say, that was really brave of you to take that leap of faith. What made you want to do it and try this today? And then the students would say to him, your family and you must have shown such bravery to survive the Holocaust. Tell me your story. And it was just such a beautiful day. I also took the kids recently to Fox 5 for tours. We went to an Israeli restaurant for lunch. So I take all these parts of my life that I'm really passionate about and speakers who I love and know. And then I want to tell you about the Holocaust Memorial and Tolerance Center of Nassau County, where I work. We call it HMTC for short. And I work there as the first ever storyteller. And what I'm doing is I'm creating documentaries on survivors and blasting them all out over social media platforms as a way to educate the younger generations who are on there. But we also have an incredibly hardworking education team separate from what I do. And they bring survivors and speakers to students all across Long Island, Nassau, and Suffolk County. And that is the most amazing work for these students to be able to hear firsthand testimony from survivors and children of survivors.
What do you hope to teach your children, your girls, about who you are and why you do this?
I hope my girls understand who they came from and the strength of our ancestors before us so that we could be here in the United States free and proud to be Jewish. I want them to always be proud of their Jewish roots and ancestry. I think being Jewish is being a good person. I want them to be good people. I want them to help others. I want them to give tzedakah, which is charity, which is something that we've been teaching them. We have tzedakah boxes for them in the house. And I always say, save up your money and you can use half for you, but half we're going to donate to, a person in need or a charity of your choice. So we're starting at a young age of teaching them how to give back and making sure that they understand where they come from.
What would be something that like you wish everyone knew about you, but you don't really discuss it?
Some people who follow me might know that I have like a very quirky side to me. I live for sports and physical activities, and I've been doing flying trapeze since I was 10 years old. I still do it during the year. I go all the way to Brooklyn on Sunday nights to do trapeze. I juggle. I play on a volleyball league and a softball league, all while having a 2-year-old and a 5-year-old. I somehow manage it all, and I'm very present for them too. But I really believe that once you become a mom, or a parent, it's very important to keep making time for yourself and doing things that you love. And it just helps me clear my head. I mean, I've been to over 35 countries. I was a huge traveler. Unfortunately, since having kids, that has stopped quite a bit. But I think once my littlest one is potty trained, we'll get started again. And like all people, there's so many different, facets to what makes someone who they are. And I had a mom say to me, like, I feel like your life hasn't changed at all since becoming a mom. And first of all, of course it has, but why does it have to completely? Why can't you become a parent and still play on your volleyball league and softball league? Why can't you have a babysitter one night a week to do that, or join a league that starts after they go to bed like I do? You can do it all. You just have to balance it and stick to it.
Somebody starting out as a journalist, as a storyteller, what would be a good piece of advice that you'd have for somebody starting out in this field?
You have to love it. You have to be passionate about it, because that passion shines through. People will take you more seriously when they see that you're actually loving the work that you're doing and that it resonates with you as a person. So love storytelling. Take a writing course, and most importantly, ask the questions that aren't obvious. It's so easy to say to a Holocaust survivor, when were you born? How did your family survive? What was it like getting the tattoo or coming face to face with Mengele? You'll get some, very heartfelt answers, but ask the emotional questions, the questions that bring out so much more than the obvious answer. For instance, when your mom used to cook Shabbat meals on Friday nights in your home, what were the smells like in your kitchen? What were the sounds like? And some of the best responses I get are from having people explain different senses to me. Not just what was it like when you met Mengele, but how did you feel in that moment? Details of not just you were scared, but was your heart pounding? Were you shaking? Were you sweating? Do you remember what you thought in that moment? So delve a little deeper into the question. Try to put yourself in that position and think of all the different senses that you have and how it would make you feel. And those will be the strongest sound bites that you get from the interview.